What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? It is your average programmer here, back again with another video. And today, as I mentioned in the previous video, and by the way, if you do not know what the dictionary collection class is, I would recommend you pause this video, you go back to the previous video that I made on the dictionary collection class, because that's sort of a prerequisite to this video. If you don't understand what the dictionary class is, this video right here is basically going to be pointless, because this video is based on the dictionary collection class, which I made a video about. So if you don't know what it is, go ahead, check out the previous video and you can come back to this one. But if you already know what the dictionary collection class is, then welcome to this video. We are going to be creating an employee management system. Now let's go ahead and run this app. And we're going to be building this from scratch, so no need to worry about the code right now, because I'm going to explain each step as we build this together. I just want to show you how it works. Now, the first part of this application is going to prompt you for the employee's ID. As you can see here, again, you don't have to understand this code. I just want to show you what I'm doing. I've got 3 employees here, Michael, Sarah, and Tom. They're the 3 employee objects. And I've got their information over here. This application is basically going to prompt you for the employee's ID, and it's going to scan the dictionary. Now, if the employee's ID is in there, it's going to print out the employee's information. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and use Michael Petersburg. Let's print out his information. Say 42642. 42642. There we go. We've got Michael Petersburg. It prints out his information. He is 23 years old and he makes $53,000 a year. So that's part 1 of this application that we're going to build. Now, both parts are going to be in this video, but here's the second part. Part 2, or the other half of what this is going to do. Let's say we don't have, or we type in a number, let's say, and this person doesn't exist. It's going to say, sorry, that employee has not been entered into the system because either that person got fired or they just somehow changed their ID number. But what it's going to do is it's going to ask you, would you like to add a new employee in the system with the same ID that you entered, this ID right here that doesn't correlate to any employee right now? Do you want to use that same ID to create a new employee, to register a new employee into the system? And you're going to enter either yes or no. So let's say yes, or let's say no for the first part. No. Now it's going to say thank you for using this app, and it's going to basically close the app. Now let's go ahead and pick yes. Let's type in a random number, random ID. Let's say 78323. All right, that employee has not been entered into the system. Now let's say yes. Yes. Now here's what it's going to do. It's going to prompt you for the name of the new employee. See, enter the new employee's name. Let's say Bob. Let's say Peters. It's going to ask you for Bob Peters' age. Let's say 45, and his salary. Let's say he makes $46,000. And it's going to print out his info once I type in everything that it's asking me to type in. See, as you can see, it says new employee was successfully added. And then it prints out Bob Peters' information. His ID is 78323. So they've registered his ID with the ID that didn't exist before. And they've taken the name, they've given him Bob Peters. He is 45 years old and makes $46,000 a year. Now that's the basic gist of this application. That's how this employee management system is going to work. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into creating this application. Let's get this out of the way. And let's open up a new console project. Let's see, it should be here. Here we go. Let's use .NET Core. Let's say employee management. You can call this whatever you want, but I'm going to call it employee management. Let's go ahead and create this. So again, I'm going to go through every step of the code, every step of every piece of code I write, every line I write, I'm going to go over it with you. So no need to worry about anything. And the first thing we're going to do is actually create the employee class, because that's the simplest thing. Let's go ahead and get the simple things out of the way first. Let's go ahead and drag this. Now I'm going to run this so we can get the lag out of the way. It takes a while the first time you run it. Let's give it a second here. Any minute now. Any minute now. All right, there we go. It should print out hello world. There we go. All right, now let's go ahead and create the employee class. I'm going to do this all in the source file, in the program file. Let's go ahead and say public class. I don't think you can see. Sorry about that. Public class employee. So this is basically the object that we're going to use to, or the class that we're going to use to create employee objects. So without this, our application would not function properly. And we're going to use 4 properties. Let's go ahead and create 4 properties. Public. Let's go ahead and use string for the ID. And the reason I'm using string for the ID is because the ID could possibly contain some letters as well, not just numbers. You can make it an int if you want, but I'm going to make it a string. I'm going to say get set. Let's go ahead and create the name now. Name is going to be string. Let's go ahead and do the age. Int, of course. Now for the last property, it's going to be their salary, and that's going to be a double. I cannot type for some reason. I say this every video. All right, so this is all we need for the employee class. That is it. That's all we need for the employee. Let's go ahead and get rid of this hello world statement here. Now, let's go ahead and let's create the employees. Let's say we've got var, let's say Melissa equals new employee. We're going to create several employees here, maybe 3. Now let's use object initialization syntax. Let's say her ID is some 5-digit number. It could be any length you want, but I'm going to make it 5. Let's say her name is Melissa Winklefield. Obviously, these names are horrible, but it's not the point of this application. The point of this application is create an employee management system, not to see how good of names we can pick. Let's say she's 34, and for the last one, let's say her salary is 73K. All right, so we're done with Melissa. Let's create 2 more, just for brevity's sake. Let's not make this too long. Let's say Peter equals new employee. Let's go ahead. Use object initialization syntax again. ID equals 98242. That's fine. Let's say full name is Peter. Let's go with Griffin. If any of you are fans of Family Guy, then great. Let's go age equals, how old was Peter? I think he was in his 30s, but let's go 46. All right, salary equals, let's say Peter makes 123K. Let's create one more employee. Let's say var Henry. Who's new employee. All right, this is the last customer. Try not to make this too boring. ID equals 1, 2, 3, 7, 8. Name Henry. Tennis wall. Who cares? And for the age, let's say he's 21. 21. And for the salary, he makes 58,000. All right, so we've created our employee objects. These are the employees we're going to be adding into the system to begin with. So let's go ahead and create our dictionary now. Let's go ahead and do that. Now let's go ahead, before we do that, let's bring in the using system or statement. System that we need to call the collections namespace, the generic collections namespace. Dot generic, because the dictionary is a generic class, so we have to import that namespace. All right, var employee system equals new dictionary. So the first value, as you know, the dictionary takes in two values, T key and T value. So they are basically generic types. So it's going to take in a key, which is going to be the string, which is the ID. Remember, we're passing in the ID, and based on the ID, the dictionary is going to search through and see which one matches. So we're going to use the string and the employee. That's what we want to get back, an employee object. So we're going to get back an employee object, and we're going to print out their information. This is why the value is employee. All right, let's go ahead and add them into the system right now. Employee system dot add. We are going to say we're going to add their IDs. The first one, oh, sorry. The first employee is Melissa. I kept typing in Michael. Dot ID, comma. And the reason I'm passing in two parameters here is because it accepts two parameters, which is the string and the value. So the string is going to be the ID, because that's what we want to search through the dictionary for. And the value is going to be the employee object, which is just Melissa. Let's go ahead and add two more. Let's say, who is it? Peter. Print out Peter. All right, we're almost done with the boring stuff. Don't worry, hang in there with me. Henry, I'm going to get back Henry. This is supposed to be lowercase. All right, so I went through everything with you so far. We've created the 3 employees. We've set their initial values, which is their information, and we've added them into the system. So these employees are already working for this company. They are not new. They've been working for the company for some time. We don't know how long, but that's not necessary to know. So here we go. We are first going to prompt the user for the ID. And we're going to use that, or we're going to do that using the console.write method. So what are we going to do? We are going to ask the user to enter the employee's ID. All right, they're going to enter the employee's ID. Now what do we want to do? We basically want to read what they type in, and we want to save that into a variable because we want to hold on to that so we can scan through the dictionary and see whether or not that value is in the dictionary, or that key is in the dictionary in this case. Console.read line. We're going to read whatever the user types in, and we're going to store it in this ID field. So here's where the fun parts come, or this fun part comes. This is where we create the search employee method. This method is going to be used to do all the processing. It's going to search through the dictionary and see whether or not the value that the user types in matches the ID that is already in the dictionary. If it does match, then that employee's information is going to be printed out. If it doesn't match, then it's going to prompt them and see whether they want to add a new employee into the system or not, as I showed you earlier. But let's go ahead and create this method. Let's jump out of this main method, and let's do the search employee method here. All I've done was I've jumped out of this main method, still inside the program class. As you can see, you can follow this one. We've jumped outside of it. I'm going to create our search employee right in here. So let's go ahead and start with, of course, the header. We're not returning anything. All we're doing is console right lining, or writing to the console. Search employee. Now what is this going to take in? Excuse me, sorry. It's going to take in a dictionary with a string, or dictionary that takes in a string and an employee object. So it's basically going to take in whatever dictionary we want to search through, and then the ID that we want to look for. ID. So all I've done was created the method. We're not returning anything, which is why we made it void. All we're going to do is we're going to pass in, we didn't name this, let's give it the name employee system. Let's give it the same name, doesn't matter. Employee system. Let's actually change it. Employee, let's say manager. Let's say employee manager. So we're going to search through this dictionary for the key that is passed in. All we're doing is passing in a dictionary that we want to search through, and then the key that we want to look for inside of this dictionary that we pass in. So let's start with a loop, because that's what we want to do to search through the dictionary. If we want to search through any kind of collection, the best way to go about it would be with a loop. So let's go ahead and say for. Use a for loop, which is my favorite loop. Let's keep it simple. I equals 0. As long as I is less than. So as long as we haven't reached the end of this collection class, dictionary collection class, we want to continue. So we're going to say employee manager.count, because the all count returns is the number of items inside of the dictionary dot count. It's just like the length of an array. Array.length returns the length of the array. The count property is very similar. Same thing, basically. Exact same thing. Employee manager.count, we want to continue to increase I. All right. Now, let's go ahead and use our if statements. Bring some control flow into here. So if employee manager, we're going to search through that dictionary. We're going to use the contains key method. All it does is searches through the dictionary for the key that we pass into here. As you can see, it takes in a string key, and we're going to pass in the key, which is the ID over here that we pass in as a second parameter into the method itself. That contains key ID. So all we're doing is taking this ID that the user passed in, and we're passing it into here as well to search through the dictionary to see if it contains that value. So if employee manager.contains key, we want to console.writeLine. We are going to use some string interpolation here. And let's go ahead and format this ID. And we're going to say manager.id id.id. Let me show you what I did here. So basically, I use the indexer to, it's similar to an array. Just like how you have an array and you use the I variable to get that element, I'm basically using, with a dictionary, I'm basically using indexer syntax to retrieve the value of whatever key we pass in. Similar to how with an array, let me write it here really quickly. Let's go ahead and do it down here. So let's say we've got an array of integers equals 7, 5, and similar to how we have that, and we can access 3 by passing in the index 2, or sorry, 1, because it's the second item, or if it's 0 based, it's the first item of the array, so 0, 1, and that returns 3. This is the exact same thing with a dictionary. You can use indexer syntax to get the key. So you open up brackets, you would pass in the key, and it would give you the value. That's all it is. You're passing in the key, and it gives you the value. You're passing in the key on the dictionary, and it gives you the value. So we're going to get the value of from that employee, their ID, and we're going to write ID. Let's go ahead and go to a new line with \n. I'm going to say name, and we're going to keep using this indexer syntax. Employee manager. Why is this capital? Manager. I'm going to say ID dot name. So we're going to get their name now. I'm going to say \n once again. \n. Let me go out a little bit. We're going to say age. And the reason I'm writing this close together, you'll see it's formatted nicely when you actually print it out onto the console. I'm going to say employee manager ID dot age. So let's go ahead and now write their salary. Scoot over here just so you can see salary. Should get some space in between here. Manager ID, it's supposed to be a D dot salary. All right, so let's go ahead and test this before we move further. That's one thing I like to do. I like to test along the way, not just when I'm done. So we should get back, if the employee's in the system, we should get back the formatted version of their information. So let's go ahead and run this. Let's see what we've got so far. should ask us to enter the ID. So let's use Peter Griffin 98242. 98242. I'm gonna get back his information. 98242. That did not. Oh, I didn't call the method. That's why. Employee. I'm gonna search through the employee system dictionary. So we have to actually call the method in order for it to work. I should have known that. So we're going to call the method. We're going to pass in the employee system dictionary because that's the dictionary we want to look for or look through. And we are going to look for the ID. So we're going to read the ID and we're going to pass it into the method. And that's going to do the processing. It's going to check to see if it contains it and then print out their information if it does. So let's run that again. And let's type in Peter Griffin one more time, 98242, 98242. And there we go. We've got Peter Griffin. It printed out twice, and I'm going to fix that right now. The reason it printed out twice, we didn't use return in the method. So we can fix that simply with a return statement. And that's it. Let's run that one more time. Let's go ahead and try that again. 98242. As you can see, we are good. Now let's fix this formatting right here. A simple formatter in C# should do the trick. All we need to do is write C2 because it's a currency. C2. Now let's do Henry 12378. And everything's going to be formatted. 12378. There we go. We've got Henry Tennis Wall, 21 years old, $58,000 a year. All right, so that's the first part. Let's go ahead and move on to the second part. I apologize if this video gets too long, but I want it to be all in one video just so you understand how this works. Second part is going to be a little bit trickier, but we can get through it with a little bit of logic. Now, we've got the first part done. Let's take care of the second part inside this else statement. So, if the dictionary collection class does not contain this ID, then we want to do something else. Let's go ahead and see how this works. We want to first tell the user that this person is not in the system. This person is not in the system. Sorry. There is no employee associated with that ID. But what we want to also do is ask the user whether or not they'd like to add this person into the system or create a new employee, add a new employee into the system with that same ID. We use console.write so it doesn't go to a new line. Sorry, let me move this out of the way. Would you like to add a new employee into the system with this ID? Let's say enter yes or no, nothing else. Yes or no. Enter yes or no. So, as you can see, if the key does not work, we're going to jump to this else block. We're going to say, sorry, that employee, there's no ID associated with, or there's no employee associated with this ID. We're also going to ask them whether they'd like to add this new employee into the system. They're going to answer yes or no, and we are going to read that. So we're going to create a string variable. or a variable of type string. I'm going to say response. Let's keep it simple. Call it response and read the line. Read line. That's all we want to do. Now we've got the response. They've either entered yes or no. So we're going to take that response and we're going to store it inside of this variable. Now let's go ahead and write a new if else block inside of this else block. So we're going to say if response. So if the response is yes, we want to do something, as opposed to if the response is no. We want to do two different things. We want to do the same thing if they respond yes or no, which is why we're using another if else block. So if response equals yes, and I'm supposed to use two equal signs here. Response equals yes, we're going to jump into this if block. Now let's go ahead and ask the user to enter the employee's name, because we've already recorded the ID, or we're going to store that ID somewhere inside a new variable. The employee's name. Enter the new employee's name. So they are going to enter the new employee's name, and then we want to store that in a variable called new name. Now what we're going to do is read it. We're going to read what the user types in and store it in a variable. Then we're going to console.write and ask the user to enter the employee's age. Enter the new employee's age. We're going to store this inside of an int variable. New age equals console.readLine. Last thing, we are going to ask them to enter the employee salary, what they're going to be paying this new employee. And we're going to store this in a variable of type double. I'm going to take care of that squiggly red line. I know exactly why. Salary equals, and this is going to happen to this too. Same squiggly red line. Dot read line. So the reason it's giving this squiggly red line is because we have to convert this input into an int. Any input that's taken in is carried as a string, which is why we don't get it for here, because our variable is of type string. So when we read the line, a string can be put into a string, but a string cannot be put into a variable of type int. So what we have to do is convert it to an int. So we have to basically write a wrapper around this read line and say convert to int 32. And we get rid of that squiggly red line. Same thing is going to happen to, let's close it off. And same case with this. We can't store a variable of type string, or we can't store a string into a variable of type double. So we have to write a double wrapper around this. Convert dot to double. And we get rid of those squiggly red lines. Now, what we want to do is we just want to say, hey, or create this new employee, sorry, var new employee equals new employee. So we're basically making use of this employee class again. So we're creating this new employee and we're assigning it the values that we've taken in. So we're taking the string int and salary. So the ID is going to be, remember, the ID that we're taking in if this first part is not true. So if this first part is not true, the user passes in an ID that is not inside the dictionary, we're going to jump to this else block. And then we're going to take that same ID that doesn't correlate to anyone in the system yet, and we're going to use it for this new employee. So that's why we're just going to assign it to ID. We're going to have this new employee's ID be the ID that didn't correlate to anyone in the system yet. So that's how we're going to do that. And that is how we use that same ID over for this new employee. Name equals new name. So we've asked them to type in the new name, and we are going to assign it to the employee, or this new employee's name. New name, going to say age is going to be new age because we've asked them for the employee's age. And salary is going to be salary right here. Now don't get these two variables confused. Don't get this salary confused with this salary. This salary is a property. It was already part of the employee class. This salary we're taking in, and we're just writing a random variable of types, a random variable called salary. We can change the name of this if you want, but these two are not the same. This salary and this salary. All right, and that is it for the if, or actually not. We have to tell the user that the employee was successfully added into the system so that they know. It just adds to the user experience. New employee was successfully added. Exclamation mark. Let's go ahead and have a blank console.writeLine because we'll have some space in between. And we are going to print out this employee's information. WriteLine. We're basically going to take this, or actually not. What we're going to do is use string interpolation. We are going to do the same thing we did up here, but for this new employee. ID is new employee dot ID \n. We're gonna say name is, this is supposed to be a capital D. New employee dot name \n. Age is going to be new employee dot age. You guessed it. Age, and the last thing is going to be their salary \n. It's going to be employee dot salary. And that is it for this part. Let's go ahead and format that. C2. Oops. C2. This is just for formatting again. This is supposed to be an N. All right. So we've taken care of the if statement. I'm going to go through all this one more time before we actually run the project. Now let's jump out of here. If the response is yes, we're going to do all this. If the response is no, which is going to be an else, we are just going to simply say thank you for using our app, because it means that they do not want to add this new employee in the system. They could have just been looking to see if that employee is still there. 1, 2. Nope. Thanks for using this app. All right, we are finally done. And then we just want to return after this else statement. And the reason I've got this return here, because if these aren't true, then we just want to get out of here. Or, sorry, if the else block isn't true, we just want to jump out of here. All right, so let's go ahead and run this, or let's go ahead and go through it one more time. I've created my employee class down here. I've created the employee class right over here. Now, second thing I did was, create the employee class with these 4 properties: ID, name, age, salary. Now, I've created these 3 objects, which are basically, how can I explain this? Basically, children of the class. So we've made use of the class, and we've created these objects. We've got Melissa, Peter, Henry, and we've assigned these class or these objects value to their properties. We've assigned values to the property of the objects that we created. We've got ID, Melissa, whose ID is 78231. Her name is Melissa Winklefield, age 34, and salary 73,000. Same case for the other 2. Now, these employees were already working in the company, so we've already added them into the system before anything. They're already in the system. Now, what we did here was we basically asked the customer or the user for the employee's ID. Whoever's using our app, we want to ask them, hey, what is the ID of the employee that you're looking for? And we're going to read that value that the user types in, and we're going to store it in this variable ID, which is what this read line variable does. It reads the value of the stream operator, and it stores it inside a variable if you want. And then we call the search employee method, and we pass in the employee system, which is the dictionary, because this is the dictionary we want to look through. We could have created another dictionary with different employees, and we would have to pass that in if we wanted to search through that dictionary. But we only got one dictionary here, so we're going to search through this dictionary for the employee, and we're going to pass in the ID, which is the key. So remember, we've read that ID and we're passing it in again into the search employee method. So here's our method over here. We've got the search employee method, which takes in, again, remember, the dictionary and the key. So we've created a giant for loop. It's basically saying, hey, look through the entire dictionary and see if this ID matches any of the IDs that we already have in the dictionary. Look through the entire dictionary, which is what this basically means, which is why we use the for loop. Employee manager.count, which is the length of the dictionary that we're searching through. Now we jump into this for loop and we go inside, and we've got an if-else statement, a general if-else statement. So for the if statement, if the employee or if the ID that we pass in, remember we read it from the user's input, if that ID that we pass in, that we passed into here, same thing. If the ID that we pass in contains, or the ID that we pass in matches anything in the dictionary, one of these IDs, then what we want to do is basically print out that user's information as I showed you before. And then we just want to break out of the loop because we found the employee and we want to print out their information. Else, if that doesn't work, basically if the employee does not exist or with that ID, then we want to jump into this else block. We want to tell the user, hey, there's no employee associated with that ID. And we want to ask them, do you want to add a new employee into the system? Which is why you typed in that ID. And they're going to type in either yes or no. And then we're going to record that response and store it in this response variable. Now we're going to perform some operations based on whether the user passes in yes or no. If the user passes in yes, then we want to ask the user for the employee's name, their age, and their salary, because we've already got the ID that we're going to use again to give it to this new employee. Since that ID didn't exist for any previous employee, we're going to use it for this new employee. which is why I passed in that same ID that we passed in up here, over here. And we're going to store the new employee's name inside of this name variable or name property. We'll store the new age inside of this age property. And again, you can see here that we've asked the user for all of these things. We've asked them for the age, the salary, and we've stored it inside of variables. We're just assigning it to the customer's or the employee's property. Salary into the salary property. And then we say, hey, we've added the customer into the system successfully. And then we print out their information formatted just as we did if the employee was already in the system. Now, if the user types in no, we're going to jump to this else block here. We are just going to say, hey, thank you for using our app. Since you do not want to add this employee into the system, we're just going to say thank you. And you're done, basically done using the app. And that is the general idea of how this works. That is our employee management system. Now let's go ahead and run this and see what's going on here. So first we're going to type in one that exists. So we're going to type in Henry tennis wall 12378. It's going to prompt us for the ID 12378. And we get Henry tennis wall's information. As you can see, name Henry tennis wall, ID. He's 21 and makes 58 grand a year. Now let's say we type in an employee that doesn't exist. And type in 234789. And it tells us, sorry, there is no employee associated with that ID. And it asks us, would you like to add a new employee into the system with this ID? So we're going to reuse this ID if we type in yes. If not, the system's just going to close. It's going to say, hey, thank you for using this app. So let's go ahead and say no first. And as you can see, it tells us, thank you for using this app. Now let's go ahead and type in yes. Let's type in an ID that doesn't exist, 70823. Let's type in yes. And here we go. We type in the new employee's name. Let's say Robert Tillman. And it's going to ask us for the age. Let's say 56. And it's going to ask us how much he makes a year. It's at 89,000. There we go. New employee was successfully added, and it gives us the employee's information. As you can see, it reused the same ID that was not in the system before to assign to this new customer, or this new employee, excuse me. We've got Robert Tillman, 56, it makes 89,000. And that is our app. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button. And if you want to stay tuned for more content, be sure to subscribe. Thank you so much if you stuck through the entire time. It really means a lot to me. I hope you all have a good day. Make sure you stay safe and be ready for the next video. Take care, guys. Peace out.